Welcome to class. I'm Trevor, and on this channel I chat all things D&D. In my last video, I talked about how my campaign was ending, and in this one, I want to give some tips and pointers and advice for planning your next homebrew D&D game. Now here's the deal. There's a lot of ways to approach planning a D&D game, and what I'm going to go over in this video is a different approach than I even took compared to my last game. So I want to make sure that that is known right off the bat. You can play the pre-published adventures and run them perfectly fine. This stuff is all extra, it's all gravy, but I find a lot of joy in it, and I imagine a lot of DMs might as well. But even still, what I'm showing is not the be-all end-all. This is one way of doing it, and I've even done it in different ways for different campaigns, depending on what's best. So there's a lot of flexibility here. I just want to show you the resources that I'm using for how I'm planning my next adventure. On the note of there being a lot of different ways to approach this, I do want to mention the kind of avenues you could go down, right? You can play a completely pre-published adventure. You can create the world with your players. This might seem a little odd, but I think a great example of it is in the Adventure Zone, the newest arc, Aethersea. They are actually, before the game proper started, they played a quiet year and created the world together. This meant that Griffin, the DM, didn't have to do all of the world building, and the players were bought in on the world building more. I think that that's phenomenal. I know in the newest arc of Dungeons and Daddies, they're playing the ancestors of their previous characters. It's awesome. The players automatically have buy-in because of it. Now, if you want to start from scratch, you can start from scratch based on your own mind, whatever you come up with, or you can use inspiration from other sources, be they movies or books or whatever. My last game, for instance, was inspired by folklore, and this one is inspired by a Magic the Gathering set, specifically Streets of New Capenna. The big things to remember are you're not writing a novel, and you can put in as much as you want to the world building elements of this. Just remember that your players are an integral part, and do not plan something that's completely closed off or irrelevant to their kind of input and what they're going to be doing. In previous games, I've done my planning in varied ways. Sometimes I've done it just in journals, sometimes in Google Drive, sometimes in OneNote. This time I'm trying out Notion because I saw SlyFlourish's Notion template that I'll actually show right now. This is the lazy campaign template from SlyFlourish. It's been a complete asset to me. I'll link it in the description. It's absolutely phenomenal. But I've adapted this and kind of tweaked and changed what I needed, and that has become my Capenna world building guide. And I might even come back here and pull some pages that I thought I might not need and things like that. You can see that it's broken down where there's like a template for session notes, there's session 0 notes, characters, NPCs, locations, villains, items, etc. It's really awesome, and it lets you do a lot of cool things. I'm going to transition from this template to my new Capenna version, my world building document. But remember, all of it is just because of how incredible SlyFlourish is. I didn't create a lot of the layout that's from this. So I want to give credit where it's due. This is my new Capenna Workbook. It's the world building document, but it'll also be a living document where I'll take session notes and add NPCs and things like that. This first page is just the example session notes template, so anytime I have a game, I can duplicate this and put my notes there. The next one is going to be for my session 1. I've already done session 0, but I need to plan session 1, and I haven't done that yet. When I'm done editing or recording this video, that's probably going to be my next thing that I work on. The next page is my session 0 notes. I've done session 0s with my players already, and I've done a video on session 0s too, but this document has a lot of excellent things to keep in mind. Again, I made some adaptations compared to the template itself, but I made sure that I talked about the truths of the campaign, the possible villains that would come up, whether they were actual individual villains or conflicts that the party might have to face, the factions, and in this world it's very important because each of my players is a part of one of these families. I went over the world building or the history. We went through how we're going to build characters together with all the options and the house rules we're going to use, safety tools, and I was able to give them some flavorful images to kind of evoke the feelings that I wanted them to get out of this world. Next, we have characters, and this is where having a document like this compared to something like OneNote or Drive, at least how I use those, is just absolutely phenomenal. I have all of my characters here and their D&D Beyond links and what skills they're trained in and what languages they speak. This resource I am so excited to be able to use because in my games, I no longer have to ask, hey, does anyone speak Undercommon? Because I can just see it. It sounds so minor, but coming from a DM who's DM'd table games primarily and is not great at planning in advance, having a document with all these resources in the same place, I'm just so elated about it. The next page on this document is the NPCs. And one of the good things about pulling from Magic and homebrewing based off of that is I have a lot of not only great art, but great like connections and just really strong characterization to build off of for these individuals. So all of the characters that have pictures are from Magic, and they have existing lore and existing ties to one another. The characters that don't have pictures were actually suggestions from viewers, both here and on TikTok. If you have a character that you want me to try to incorporate into my weekly game, drop it in the comments. I'd love to. I think it would be a really cool way to develop that community. And I can add them to this document, which means that when my players are walking around this like really dense urban environment, I can pull a random character that is from this list rather than just having to kind of peter around and do it in a more improvisational way. Then we have locations, and these are all of the locations that I have so far. I've pulled a lot of this stuff from the like world building documents from New Capenna. We have villains, specifically just right now the adversary or Obnixilis, if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering's lore. I haven't messed with the item page yet. As I start moving items from the world of Magic to my world that I'm creating, I'll put them there before transferring them to D&D Beyond. The old session notes is just as the session ends, I can put the notes there as kind of a repository, and it gives me a place to look back at all of the notes so I don't miss any kind of plot hooks or character introductions. The campaign database is actually where all of the other information pulls from. So all of the NPCs, locations, everything but the characters pulls from the campaign database. And I was able to actually attribute like who suggested these characters for the characters that were submitted by all of you, which I thought was a really cool additional feature. And then I made one last page on here that's just called Homebrew and Planning. It's kind of like a scratch pad. I just needed somewhere to plan out when I'm like brainstorming a magic item, or in this case, these were my backgrounds that I made for the different New Capenna families. Before I put them in D&D Beyond, I wanted to make them here. So like I made a background as well as a magic item that the players could get for being like in good graces with their particular family. And I put them here. If there's any interest and you want me to share these backgrounds, I know I think Core Artificer on Tumblr has also created backgrounds for all of the New Capenna like families, which I think is so awesome that there are multiple people on the internet doing these things. But if you want me to share mine, I'm happy to make a separate video where I share my backgrounds for all of the different New Capenna families, as well as the like spell lists that I have associated with them. But I thought that having a page where I could just do any kind of homebrewing and like plotting stuff out, I thought that would be useful, at least based on the way that I tend to plan. And really, like, that's it. My next step is planning out my first session. And I need to figure out where my players are starting, what they're going to be doing. I have some ideas, and I've been talking to some friends who aren't in the campaign about what they would suggest. But this is how I'm using Notion in my next D&D campaign. And I'm really looking forward to it. I hope it works out well. So that's SlyFlourish's Notion template and my variation of it. Again, I've been DMing for quite some time, and this is the first time that I've gone this hard on world building and planning, but it got me really excited for this new campaign. I'm looking forward to seeing how my players interact with this world and where the adventure takes us. If you want me to release a video about the first session that I plan and how I start them off in this world, I'm happy to do so. Just let me know in the comments down below. If you thought this was valuable and interesting, if you like this kind of D&D or D&D and Magic crossover stuff, subscribe to the channel. And as I always say, be safe, make smart life choices.